And now I would like to present very quickly Dr. Gary. In addition to being a popular keynote speaker at some of the world's most prestigious education conferences, Gary Stager is a journalist, teacher, educator, consultant, professor, software developer, publisher, and a school administrator. An elementary teacher by training, he has taught students from preschool through doctoral studies. In 1990, Dr. Gary Stager led professional development in the world's first laptop schools and played a major role in the early days of online education. Gary is the founder of the Constructing Modern Knowledge Summer Institute for Educators. Dr. Stager's work has earned a PhD in Science and Mathematics Education and a Grammy Award. Please welcome Dr. Gary Stager.
Well, thank you very much and good morning. It's great to see all of you, and it's an honor to be with you in Cairo. I apologize in advance for speaking very quickly. I have 35 years worth of stories to share with you, and I'm also originally from New York City, so I tend to speak quickly. But hopefully the images and the opportunity to have a slower conversation later today will help you catch up. If you would like to stay in touch after the presentation, if you send an email to my robot assistant at friend@inventtolearn.com, don't write anything fancy in it because it's going to be ignored, but that way you'll be on our newsletter and we'll be able to continue the conversation into the future. And there are a lot of resources related to what I'm going to be talking about today at inventtolearn.com and cmkfutures.com. Oh, skip that. Okay, so I'd like to begin with some major principles, some ideas that animate my work. The first is that young people have a remarkable capacity for intensity. Young people have a remarkable capacity for intensity, and it's important that we build upon that capacity for intensity, otherwise it manifests itself as boredom or wasted potential or misbehavior. This is a photograph I took 25 years ago in one of the early laptop schools. The kids were programming on their computers, and in the time that elapsed between hitting the return key and awaiting the result to appear on the screen, every ounce of this kid's being is mobilized in anticipation of the result. He's shaking with anticipation. And in that case, and in literally hundreds of classrooms around the world since, the same thing happens. Teacher takes me aside and says, "That kid's not very good at school." And after hearing that many, many, many times, I diagnosed the problem as there being an acute intensity imbalance. There's an imbalance between that capabilities, his understanding of the world in which he lives, and the pace and expectations of the classroom. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about this morning is about trying to find ways to close that intensity gap. There are times in history where the technology changes dramatically, and that we should be aware of those changes. In a book that I co-authored a couple of years ago called Invent to Learn, Making Tinkering and Engineering in the Classroom, which is supposed to be available in Arabic shortly, we identified 3 categories of game-changing technology. 3 ways in which a technology is offering new opportunities that never existed before. The first is digital fabrication. Until recently, if you wanted to make something on a computer, everything you made lived on the screen or was spit out on paper. But now we can make actual things with technology like 3D printers and laser cutters. And the power of this technology isn't that every year 7 student can make an identical Yoda keychain. It's that for the first time in history, children have access to the Z-axis, and they can make the thing they need that perhaps no one else in the world needs or ever will need in the moment in which they need it. The second area of game-changing technology is physical computing. You can think of this simply as robotics, but it's more like adding interactivity and intelligence to everyday objects. With low-cost microcontrollers and a variety of conductive materials, you can make objects that do things, that interact with their environment. Kids can make a football jumper with directional signals made out of lights on the back and a switch in their wrist that they can use to indicate which way they're turning when they ride their bike home. Or they can make a necklace that alerts them when their least favorite teacher is approaching. Or they can make a birthday card for their mother that sings and puts on a light show. We also have revolutions in the price of cost of computing. So we can have things like the Raspberry Pi, which is a $35 quad-core computer, or its $5 version, which I have here. Not only is there no excuse for every child to have their own computer, but you can now embed these things in other technology. So if you have an old television set in your school, you can attach this to the back of it and have it maybe play videos from within the school day, or the news of the day, or weather, or information you want to share with the public, or ideas that we've never even considered before. And then the last game changer is computer programming. I think every kid needs to learn how to program computers, not because it may lead to a job someday, but more importantly because it gives them agency over an increasingly complex and technologically sophisticated world. Computer programming is the new liberal art. It allows us to answer the question that my colleague and mentor Seymour Papert began asking almost 50 years ago. Does the computer program the child, or the child program the computer? This is a question that's fundamental to democracy, about who's in charge. And I firmly believe that kids should be in charge of the machine rather than the machine being in charge of them. Papert also said that if you make things with computers, you can make more interesting things and you can learn a lot more by making them. We're expanding the breadth and depth and range of projects that are possible. We're adding colors to the crayon box. So if we believe that learning by doing is valuable, we know that learning by making is a way of concretizing those experiences, making them durable. But let's say you're already a child-centered, Montessori-influenced, Reggio-based, constructivist, project-based school with lots of play and beautiful artwork created by students everywhere. What is this making add that's new? Well, I think there are at least four things. One is enhanced expressiveness, meaning that if in the past a child can make a puppet out of a cereal box, and now they have the ability to make a puppet out of a cereal box that also sings, dances, or sends a text message to their grandmother, why shouldn't they be able to do that? The second area is precision and reliability, not just following directions accurately or measuring and cutting precisely, but creating things that have reliably reproducible phenomena. Meaning, if I invent something, or make something, create something, it works now, it works after lunch, it works tomorrow, it works a week from now. That's a very important engineering principle. The third is the ability to make real things. If you can create real things, the learning experience is more authentic, and we can make a complexity possible. Children today can and should have access to ways of knowing and doing and knowledge domains that were unimaginable just a couple of years ago. So when we talk about learning by making, I'd like to suggest that it's a stance. It's a way of viewing the world with the confidence and competence that suggests I can solve any problem I confront, even if I just have to learn something new in order to be better at it. And schools are terribly excited by this idea, but they often start with an inappropriate step, which is creating a specialized place where some people get to use the stuff every couple of weeks if they're lucky. And I like to suggest that the best makerspace is between your ears. I want kids to be able to solve problems and create and express themselves throughout the school day, regardless of how old they are, regardless of what class they're in, and have the materials that they need for knowledge construction within arm's reach. So as I said before, computing extends the kinds of things kids can do. How many of you have seen the Scratch programming language? A few? Well, there's about 20 million kids using it. But it's a block-based programming language. It makes computer programming accessible to create interactive stories and animations and simulations. But now there are versions of Scratch that let you do things like connect to embroidery machines. So your mathematical explorations, your computer programs can result in beautiful knitted, beautiful textiles. Or a version of the same language can be used to output to a 3D printer. So you can be engaged in powerful three-dimensional design and actually hold something in your hand as a result of that design. The biggest idea of all of my work is summarized in this statement by Jean Piaget. Sorry, it's cut off on the right-hand side. But Piaget said that knowledge is a consequence of experience. Knowledge is a consequence of experience. There is no substitute for experience. There's a growing body of research out of places like Stanford University that's demonstrating that if the kids have an experience, work out a project, before they attend a lecture, watch a video, read a book, their understanding will be deeper than if they had reversed the process. And I would suggest that in a lot of cases, and you're going to see some examples of this during my talk, that experience can actually replace instruction. So the best thing we can do as educators is to prepare kids to solve problems that we've never even imagined. The world is going to be a very different place for them, and they're going to need to solve problems in ways that never occurred to us. Because fundamentally, children are competent. When they're making things, they tell us that they view the world differently, that they have a confidence, that they have a new set of epistemological lenses with which to view themselves and the materials they work with in the world in which they live. Here's a video of two 11-year-old boys working with Lego robotics materials. Watch the blonde kid.
Like a boss!
So in the middle of the class, he jumps up from his seat and yells, "like a boss," and smacks his hands together a couple of times. And he's not the least self-conscious about disrupting the class, because he's not disrupting the class. If you notice, no one around him cares about the disruption, because they're all equally lost in the flow of their work. That's kind of an optimum learning environment. As I mentioned earlier, the new materials and tools that exist are wholly consistent with the best principles of child development. They're not a dystopian view of replacing teachers with computers. Any teacher who thinks they can be replaced with a computer probably should be. It's a way of amplifying human potential. It's of using the computer as an intellectual laboratory and vehicle for self-expression. Here's a photograph I took at a maker fair 5 years ago of the robot petting zoo. Parents waited in line with their toddlers to spend a few minutes in a pen where they chase after and petted robots that beeped and burped and squawked and blew bubbles and ran away. And if you watch the children interact with those 3D printed robots, their behavior was completely identical to had they interacted with kittens or goats or sheep or any kind of other real animal in that environment. This is a little video clip that a teacher gave me in one of my workshops of her 2-year-old working with a new technology called Little Bits. Little Bits are snapped together magnetic electronic elements that when combined can create really fabulous machines or be prototypes for other systems. They allow kids to invent with electronics in ways that have never existed before. It's also worth mentioning, when I'm in this part of the world, the company was started and the product was invented by a young Lebanese woman who now lives in the United States. These materials were never intended for 2-year-olds, but watch this 2-year-old interact with them.
Watching.
This
Yeah.
This again.
Okay.
So she has a knob, a potentiometer she's using to adjust the amount of voltage going through the system, and she has a vibrating motor like you would find in a cell phone at the output, and she's seeing what happens to the vibration as she adjusts the electricity.
Yeah. Let's just first this,
Okay.
this, and let's just press this.
So she's being an engineer. If we think of engineering as the concrete manifestation of theoretical principles, that we have some hypothesis, we communicate it to the materials. If we're successful, we're inspired to test a larger hypothesis, ask a deeper question, decorate, embellish. If we're unsuccessful, we engage in some debugging processes. But who in society gets to be an engineer? The people who have suffered successfully through 12 or 14 years of school abstraction. I would argue that kids who have these kinds of experiences early on in their education are provided with a much richer context for learning even the existing math and science curriculum that we think is important for kids. So this very same technology can be used at a much more advanced level to create things like this.
Let's reinvent what we already have. This is the cloud bit. It can make any dumb thing an internet-connected smart device. You can talk directly to your things and not be crazy. Because now, they'll talk back. So whether you're recreating the most popular things, bringing your home to life, inventing the incredible, or prototyping the next billion-dollar idea, the cloud bit is the easiest way for anyone to snap the internet to anything.
So that cloud bit is an element that's part of this growing ecosystem that allows you to build a machine that interacts with the internet. So you might have a balloon that pops if your friend posts too many selfies to Instagram. Or you may have a robot that feeds your goldfish and sends you a text message to tell you it's been done. Or you send a text message to remind your robot to feed your goldfish. This is the Internet of Things, which you may have heard of, that people think is very complicated and mysterious. The idea that your refrigerator will know when it's out of milk or it's spoiled and will order its own, or your car will schedule its own oil change. A lot of adults are kind of terrified of this idea, but now it's part of a child's toy. It's also part of technology like this, which is an Amazon.com dash button, that if I press that one, macaroni and cheese is put in my shopping cart. They have them for washing powder, so you can stick this on your washing machine, and when you're running out of soap, you push the button and the detergent is added to your shopping cart. The only reason why it doesn't just arrive at your house in 2 hours is because adults would freak out. But it's obviously where the technology is going. In fact, Amazon announced in the last couple of weeks that they're soon going to use a key to get into your house and to put the material right in your refrigerator when you're not home. You, of course, give them permission for that and things. But this idea that a couple of years ago was completely science fiction, not only becoming part of everyday life, but becoming something that children can understand and master, I find quite exciting. So I want to introduce you to a colleague and friend of mine named Super Awesome Sylvia. I discovered her when she was about 8 years old, about 8 years ago. I didn't really discover her, she was there already, but she was a kid who fell in love with making things, with working on engineering projects, computer programming, problem solving, and she wanted to share her enthusiasm for this with other people. So what's a kid to do? She made a show for the World Wide Web, modestly titled Super Awesome Sylvia's Super Awesome Maker Show. And she went on to teach millions of people how to use some of these technologies. So in this video, she's going to be using something called the Arduino, which is a little brain board, as she calls it, that allows you to connect motors, lights, and sensors to it. You can get information from your environment and then turn things on and off and share with the internet and such. This is a technology that's being used by hobbyists and programmers and professionals alike. And in this video clip, she's using the Arduino to conduct science experiments. Now, I've edited this video for time, so you're going to see very ugly cuts in it. But you can go to her website and watch the videos in full. It's at sylviashow.com. And I just want you to see what kids are capable of doing. And there are some lessons that I want to discuss after we watch 2 minutes of this video.
Sylvia, super awesome, make a show. Go on now, gotta see this. Oh yeah, you get me mobbing. Da 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 dee da da. Sylvia show's really really cool. Go on now, gotta see this. Oh yeah, you get me mobbing. Da 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 dee da. Sylvia, super awesome, make a show. Yeah. For our first project, we'll be making an adjustable strobe. For this flashy build, we will need an Arduino, any kind will do. We'll be using the Duo Lenovo 328, a computer and a USB cable to upload to the Arduino, a bright LED. I chose blue because it's cool, but you can use any color you want. And finally, a potentiometer, if you have one. You can make this without it, but it's cooler with one. First, take your Arduino and push the LED into pins 13 and ground. Now it's time for SmartBot's Thinking Lab, where we try to explain how things work. LEDs, or light-emitting diodes, are really just diodes that emit light. electricity will only flow through them in one direction. When electricity flows in the right direction, you get light. Right. Now take your potentiometer, take the first lead and plug it into 5 volts. Now take the last lead and attach it to ground. Then take the middle lead and push that into one of the analog pins. I chose pin 2 because it's the coolest of the analog pins. I'm cool. This allows you to very carefully send a voltage between 0 and 5 volts to analog pin 2. This value is read by the Arduino as a number between 0 and 1023. Then using a little math, this number becomes the delay value for our strobe. Now we take the source code available at tm42.com/strobe and upload it to the Arduino. Now that our code is compiled and uploaded, we can experiment. Here's one of my desk fans. We remove the front grill so we can see it better. Now we just turn on the Arduino and turn off the lights. By turning the potentiometer, it looks like it changes the speed of the fan, eventually slowing it down to a crawl. It's really still moving pretty fast though, so don't touch it. If you don't have a potentiometer, you can substitute any number you want for the analog read value in the code. It won't be easy to change, but with some trial and error, you can have it tuned in no time. The code me and my dad made is open to any number of adjustments in range, speed, and output. You can even add a display to guess the RPM of spinning objects. The possibilities go on and on.
So that's what 8 years old can look like. Now, first of all, that's a lot better to making a PowerPoint presentation about a topic you don't care about for an audience you're never going to meet. But when I speak to kids, I often ask, how many of you have used the World Wide Web? I'll ask you, how many of you use the World Wide Web to answer a question or find out how to do something simple? Raise your hand. Right. Now, how many of you have put something on the World Wide Web that could help someone else answer a question or solve a problem? A lot fewer people. One of the ethics of this age should be children recognizing that they have an obligation to share their expertise. Now, I can talk about this video forever, but I want to tell one story and then focus on one educational experience. I was speaking at a university in the United States. I did a morning lecture, followed by a day-long workshop, followed by an evening lecture. And the gentleman who was the dean of the education college had to be with me the entire day, the poor guy. And he saw the video in the morning, and then that night he saw it again at the lecture. And after the evening public lecture, he came up to me and he looked very embarrassed. And I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "I'm ashamed to tell you this. But you remember when I said earlier, knowledge is a consequence of experience?" He said, "This morning when I saw Super Awesome Sylvia's video, I had no idea what she was talking about." Many of you probably feel the very same way. But during the day, he spent a half hour with these materials and a colleague messing about with them. And he said, after I spent some time with them, when I saw the video again, everything made sense. Knowledge is a consequence of experience. But then there's an issue that's related to school. She says that the way you make your strobe pulse is by sending a voltage through the board, and the board can take between 0 and 5 volts, and the way you communicate how much voltage you want to go through the board is by writing a computer program in which you have to use a range of numbers between 0 and 1023. And then she just matter-of-factly says, then using a little math, you can determine the delay value for the strobe. That is the entire K-9 mathematics curriculum everywhere in the world. If a kid can solve that problem, they're well and truly on their way. Want to just grab a prop? And after Sylvia had created a number of these videos and had spoken all around the world, we helped her as the publisher. She published a book for children explaining how to do these kinds of projects. And yet she was embarrassed to share them with her school teachers. And I was confused by that and asked her if she was embarrassed because she had published more books than them. But when we meet parents of kids who are doing things like this, they don't just tell us that their children are bored in school. They tell us school is killing my child. They say, look what my kid can do, and no one cares. Look what my kid can do, and yet every night she goes to sleep crying about some math worksheet that the school made her do that insults her intelligence and dignity. Let me show you what this technology looks like in the real world. The idea that we can make things to solve our own problems. This is a little video clip of the actor Alan Alda interviewing Professor Neil Gershenfeld at MIT, who teaches a course called How to Make Almost Anything. Gershenfeld, about a dozen years ago in a book called Fab, suggested that the next major technological innovation wasn't just going to be smaller, cheaper computers, but the idea that we could make things. That in the past, if you wanted to buy your father a birthday present, you had to get off work in time to get to the shops before they closed, hope they had what you wanted, drive a great distance to bring it to him, or wait until he visited you. Now, you can go online and order the watch and have it delivered to him. Gershenfeld suggested that in the very near future, you might go online, find 2 or 3 watches you like, combine the best features of each, put a picture of the grandchildren on it, and then email the watch to your father, and he'll print it when it arrives. So this video is about 10 years old, and all the prices in it, you can just divide by 100 today. But watch what's possible.
If I had one of these machines at home, you could email me this bike.
My sister actually was emailed this bicycle in Sydney, and she's riding one around.
You're kidding?
No, seriously.
Isn't that incredible? So wait a minute. So that means that if I order a bike from a company someday, it won't come in a truck. It'll come, everybody will have one of these machines, and a lot of what we order, lamps, furniture, bicycles, will get emailed to us. We'll have it a few seconds later.
The only thing wrong in what you said is it's not when you order the bicycle, it's when you design the bicycle. When you design the bicycle.
Okay.
Did you recognize what this is?
This is actually a model of Matisse's Blue Nude number 2. You can see the leg here, the hind leg, another leg here and the thigh, the arch of the back, the head, and the hand holding the front wheel.
In this How to Make Anything project, it's not just that students learn to make a bicycle, they learn to make their bicycle. Every bicycle is different, and part of expressing yourself in the bicycle you want is what this is all about.
Okay, all right, this will be great. Listen, work on that thing for me.
So off I went on what is certainly the first nude bicycle.
So if you can't imagine emailing a bicycle to your holiday destination and printing it when you arrive, let alone a bicycle that's in the shape of a Matisse painting, let's talk about the educational implications of this for a moment. When the same tools, materials, and techniques are found and required in the physics laboratory, the art studio, and the auto shop, we can stop sorting children into winners and losers. A project like you just saw obviously blurs the artificial boundaries between subject areas. It dissolves the distinctions between disciplines of what is art and science and humanities and technology and engineering. But once and for all, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps most importantly, it obliterates the destructive cleavage between what we consider to be vocational and academic education. This isn't just a way of finding help for kids who aren't good at school but good with their hands and helping them be a little bit more successful in the educational mainstream. This is a direct threat and challenge to your students who are good at school, because they're going to enter a world in which they're going to be required to solve problems that their teacher never taught them how to solve, and many of those problems will be solved by making something either with bits or atoms. We've overvalued learning with one's head, and the future is going to require that we learn equally with one's heart, head, and hands. I have 3 university-educated adult children. The only one who has lived on her own with a full-time job, health insurance, and an apartment since the minute she graduated university was the art major. I'm reasonably certain that your schools aren't telling children that there are different options to be successful besides being an engineer, or an MBA, or a doctor or lawyer. I have 2 friends who are television show carpenters. I don't mean they make things for television shows. I mean they make things on television shows. They're internationally famous and earn millions of dollars a year building tree houses on television. I know more tree house designers than I know lawyers. The world is different. We have to stop this idea that school knows what kids are going into, and in fact, that school has any vocational purpose at all. It needs to prepare kids to fall in love with things, to become good at them, and to solve problems that we never anticipated. That's why institutions like Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, arguably the best math and science university in the world, added a maker portfolio to their undergraduate admissions application. Because they assume that if you're applying to MIT, you're probably good at school. You probably got good grades and test scores. What they want to know is, can you learn and do things without someone having a gun to your head? Do you have the habits of mind, of persistence, of creativity, of curiosity? Have you developed the social capital required to solve your own problems, even if there's no immediate return to you? So how do we get there? I think we get there by creating classrooms where the project is the smallest unit of concern to the teacher. And now I'm going to share a bunch of examples of what I mean by this. I'm obsessed with the question of what is the smallest seed we can plant that grows the most beautiful blossom, the largest garden. What's the least possible intervention a teacher can make in a carefully prepared environment to allow children to flourish? So I was working in rural America, and this was in the corridor of one of the schools. I thought it was a piece of nostalgia, an antique. It was a fully functional pencil dispenser that poor children who forgot a pencil could put $1 into it and get a pencil out of it. And then one of the teachers would put new pencils in it and take the money home with them. And they were looking for ideas for projects in their school, and I suggested, being a wise guy, why don't you just line the corridors of the school with silly vending machines? And I thought, that's not such a silly idea. So a couple of weeks later, I was doing a workshop for teachers, and I had a lot of technological materials like we've been looking at, and I said, make a vending machine. Now that's a great prompt, because everyone knows what it means, and if you make something that does that, it's a vending machine. But what if 2 came out? We need to fix it. What if I want to be able to choose a blue one or a black one? We can add that to it. Do we want it to be coin operated? Which coins? Does it make change? How do we know that they're Egyptian coins? Do we want to have a credit card swipe to make the machine work? That there's 1,000,001 ways that people can bring their own experience and ideas to the question of make a vending machine. In this workshop, a group of teachers had a giraffe, a stuffed toy giraffe, and they decided that they wanted to make their giraffe vomit gumballs, that candy would be shot out of the mouth of the giraffe. And they very quickly realized that puking gumballs was hard, but pooping them was a lot easier. And then this really wonderful discussion ensued about, I wonder if that's why babies don't come out your mom's head. Maybe gravity is involved in evolutionary biology. There's no way you could have written a curriculum that predicted the discussions that emerged from the simple act of asking, can you make a vending machine? I've done this workshop in places all over the world over the last couple of years, dozens and dozens of times, where I bring microcontrollers like Super Awesome Sylvie was talking about, and motors and lights and sensors and craft materials and recycled junk, and all I say to the teachers is, make a bird. Singing and dancing is appreciated. Sorry? And they start off by building things, and sometimes download music and choreograph the birds to dance with their robot, turning rotational motion into angular motion. They have sensors that respond to speech, and they make these beautiful machines, and they learn a lot by doing so. In fact, if we were to tick off boxes in the curriculum, there might be hundreds of objectives in math, science, engineering, technology that these teachers with no prior experience have demonstrated understanding of in 90 minutes, essentially 2 class periods. If they work through a 2-year scope and sequence organized curriculum, they might not be able to do something as sophisticated. Now, I should add that one of the key elements to this is that I always bring a kilo of feathers with me, because the feathers give them courage. It's no longer a box of electronic parts that look scary. It's now the potential to be a bird. But there's no correct answer. And I love when people come up to me and say, how much more time do we have? And I say, about 20 minutes. And they say, okay, good, I think we'll make a beak. that if they have more time, the work gets better. Here's a video from Guadalajara, Mexico, a couple months ago. That's the stuff that memories are made of. You know, these aren't teachers hating their job and being scared of technology. They're pretty much doing the impossible. This is a group of teachers from deep in the south of the United States who wanted to make a bird come alive when you approached it. These teachers had no working understanding of greater than or less than, or as we might call it in mathematics, inequality. If you asked them about greater than or less than, they would scrunch up their face and say, is the crocodile's mouth this way or that way? It was just some meaningless trick. But if you have a sensor, you have to determine what kind of information you're getting from the sensor. Is it numeric? Is it alphabetical? Do the numbers go up as you approach? Do they go down as you approach? What's the threshold at which you want some behavior to be triggered?
That's hilarious.
Never send a monkey to do a bird's job.
And it matches how ugly it is.
So when they approach the bird, it says never send a monkey to do a bird's job, which they downloaded. In traditional professional development, learning how to download a file could be 3 weeks. This was all in the course of minutes because they were motivated to do something. You know, we can't believe that children are competent if we behave as if their teachers are incompetent. So about 11 years ago, I created a summer institute for educators that wanted to prove that teachers were competent, they wanted to prove that they could do the impossible, that they could learn to use technology, that they could learn to learn, and they could do so in a coercion-free environment where we asked them to take off their teacher hat and put on their learner hat. Because in order for them to create a new experience for their students, they themselves need to experience what it's like to learn in a new constructive way. Again, knowledge is a consequence of experience. So let's look at some of these things that have happened. This is one of my favorite photographs of all time. We took it just as we said, no, Norm, you can't take your robot home. And look at the expression on his face. It's, again, indistinguishable from had he been a toddler, that he was so invested in what he had created, this robot that made a mess with paint. Here's 2 projects created with something called the Makey Makey, which turns your entire world into a computer keyboard, where these teachers drew a digestive system and a circulatory system on a t-shirt. They used conductive thread in it, so thread that you can sew with, but it conducts electricity, so that when they pointed to a snap, a press stud, on their body, an animation or a web page would play explaining an anatomical system. Here, they used a stolen luggage trolley from the hotel with conductive thread to make a harp. So it could make harp sounds, or it could be a mizmar, or play hip-hop licks, or just burp, whatever amuses you. But they're inventing a new instrument. Here's a project a group of teachers built that waters a plant when it gets thirsty. They had to first make a simple machine to tilt a bottle of water. Once that was successful, they had to figure out, how do I know if a plant is thirsty? It can't tell me. So they realized that they put 2 nails in the soil connected to an Arduino microcontroller. When the soil is moist, there's less resistance when it's dry. It's just the same problem as that bird coming to life. And then once that worked, they still had some time on their hands, so they said, well, why don't we put a light sensor on the system so that it doesn't water during the daylight and the water evaporates. But the part that really excited me was when the teachers said, once we determined the distance that the nails needed to be apart, we sketched and 3D printed a nail separator. There isn't a store in Cairo that sells a nail separator. There isn't a store on earth that sells a nail separator. No one needs one but them. And the technology allows them to make that. And let me just say one more thing before I forget it. Parents haven't been all that welcome in our schools. We talk about parental engagement, but if you're an immigrant parent, if you had a poor school experience, if you're illiterate, if you work 3 jobs to send your kid to school and put a roof over their head, you might not be able to engage in the school all that productively. But those very same parents know how to make things. They know how to fix things. Everywhere you look in Egypt, you see people doing things that are impossible. For the first time in history, those parents can be involved in the schools as experts, helping kids learn things that will benefit them for a lifetime. This is a dress that dances to music, that responds to sound. And what's beautiful about that is, not only is that a nice STEM project, there's science, technology, engineering, computer science involved in that, programming. They also made a dress. In a couple days, they built a system that makes a dress come to life with music, but they also made a dress, which allows for a variety of interests and skills and talents to come together to create things that would have been impossible otherwise. 2 years ago at CMK, it was 5 days after Pokemon Go came out. Do you remember when Pokemon Go came out? Everyone was walking around staring at their phones? And we were being told by the news media that the smartest, most advanced computer scientists on Earth had created this technological revolution. At my summer institute, a group of teachers said, we want to make our own Pokemon Go. The voice in my head said, you're not going to be able to do it. But my experience knew that if I kept my mouth shut and they tried, if they were unsuccessful, they would modulate their expectations. They would do something a little simpler, but they would still learn a lot. Well, it turned out that someone in the room knew that there was a version of a block-based programming language called Tailblazer that has a GPS block that reports where you are on the planet. And once you have that, everyone can create their own Pokemon Go. Which meant 5 days after we were being told that the world's most advanced computer scientists had invented this remarkable thing, school teachers were making their own versions of it. That's what the technology is making possible. This year, a group of teachers wanted to make Fitbit shoes. You know, Fitbit keeps track of your steps when you exercise. This case, they decided, why doesn't it keep track of how much we walk in the shoe itself? And when we get to our goal,
There we go, we're getting close.
the shoes will perform a little dance party for you.
You're almost at your reward.
So at 50 steps.
Oh, there we go. That's awesome.
Congratulations.
Then the lights all flash and they do this little thing. This is without instruction. This is without a worksheet. This is without quizzes and tests and bells and desks in rows and lecture theaters. It's with appropriate materials, a good prompt, a supportive culture, and sufficient time. In 3 days, they did that. People like yourselves. Here's just the last example I'll share. This also came out of last summer. Everyone loves drones. This group made a drone out of helium balloons. So we're taking high technology and combining it with timeless craft traditions and materials. So I want to end with, or start wrapping up with, how do we get here? How do we create schools that are like this? And I spend a lot of time working in Australia, and I was there a couple months ago, and the trams in Melbourne had advertisements on them that said, choose maths. People are very concerned about children in maths. In fact, once I was in a very high-level meeting in Australia where someone stood up and said, it is a matter of national security that so few students are taking advanced math subjects in our schools. And I responded, perhaps so few students are taking advanced math subjects because they're rational and they know that those courses are toxic and useless and irrelevant. And in fact, if taking maths is a key to your national security, how come these courses are optional in the first place? But let's talk about this one problem, because the failure to address the way mathematics is taught in school, I think, is emblematic of all the other problems that face us. The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics in the United States, hardly a radical organization, more than 25 years ago said that 50% of mathematics has been invented since World War II as the result of computing and the social sciences demand for number. And yet none of this mathematics is found in classrooms. And just because it's new doesn't mean it's the hardest or what you get to after you've been in school for 12 or 16 years. My colleague and friend, Conrad Wolfram, the computer scientist, mathematician, and business leader, says in his TED Talk that we spend 106 human lifetimes a day teaching hand calculation. Now, I have an iPhone. Doing this in front of an audience in Cairo is very scary and dangerous, but I'm going to try it anyway. I'm going to hold the iPhone button down and tell Siri the following. I messed it up. Solve y equals 3x plus x cubed minus 17.
Here's some information.
It solved the problem, it gave me a graph, it shows all work. Don't tell your math teachers it's going to take them 400 or 500 years to catch up. Every device in your pocket is capable of doing that. When parents get upset about school math, they always complain about they went to the shop and someone didn't know how to make change. Well, guess what? No one makes change anymore. That's a cash register that after you scan the items and you put the coins and the bills in, it has coins and bills that pop out the bottom. I don't know if these are available here yet, but everywhere else I go in the world, where you bag your own groceries, you use a machine like this. If we're spending 12 years teaching kids to make change, we're wasting a lot of time. If we can use technology to make simple things possible, that when kids need to know what they need to know, then we make complexity accessible. Here's a project created by two 10-year-old boys. They made a marimba out of PVC pipe and wood. It's a nice bit of engineering and carpentry. And they told me that they understood the mathematical calculations involved in determining how long to cut the pipe, because they were capable of doing that arithmetic, but they weren't sure that all their classmates were. So they did something quite extraordinary. They wrote a computer program in Scratch that asks you, what's the frequency of the note you want to reproduce? And what's the diameter of the tube? And then the computer tells you how long to cut it. When we think about computer programming, we almost always think about the artifact that results being a computer program. In this case, the artifact is a marimba. I like to call this instrumental computing. And after 400 or 500 adults told these kids how brilliant and talented they were, I walked up to them and said, you know, this is about music, right? And they said, yeah. And I said, how come I have to go through all these pages of lookup tables that you printed off the World Wide Web to find frequencies? Why can't I type B flat into the computer? And the kids in unison said, oh, and grabbed their laptop and ran away. And I was receiving email from their teacher for a week or so, updating me on their progress. Because not only did I understand that it was capable, that it was possible to write that program, I knew that they were capable of writing that program, which is why it's so important for teachers to understand some of this stuff, at least just at a rudimentary level. You can ask good questions, you can point them to resources, you can throw a well-timed obstacle in their way that will lead to a profound learning experience. We can use programming environments like Turtle Art, where we communicate mathematical ideas to computer and create beautiful images with very simple programs, where a first grader ends up with a deeper understanding of Cartesian coordinate geometry, of probabilistic behavior, of positive and negative integers in a couple of minutes of messing around than most 10th graders learn in a geometry class. But we don't have to just make pictures. We might explore Islamic tiling, which combines a lot of different disciplines. And one of my former graduate students did a project where he had fourth graders design these patterns, crop them, convert the file format so that he could open it in 3D design software and extrude the image, meaning take the 2D image and make it 3D, because then you could send it to the 3D printer and get these beautiful cookie cutters, which you could use to bake cookies or to play with Play-Doh, or if you're given ceramic clay, you can stamp them, fire them, hand paint them, and you end up with these extraordinarily complex, spectacularly beautiful works of art that could be used as a footpath in the school or a wall in the cafeteria or just sent home to mom as a gift. I love three things about this project. One is it goes from the digital to analog. We have something on the screen and we can have something in our hand as a result of it. Then it goes from mathematics to art. We couldn't have created this unless we started by communicating mathematical ideas to the computer and working through understanding of them, and that resulted in something beautiful and aesthetically pleasing. And the third thing I love about this project is, in the 1 minute it took me to share it with you, you know how to do it yourself. So what about the curriculum? Is it all I'm talking about fancy American arts and crafts, the kinds of nonsense you do at summer camp? Well, how about fractions? Fractions is a piece of stupidity we torture kids with for several school years. I was working in a school in Los Angeles where the 5th grade teacher had written on the whiteboard, learn numerator and denominator. It had been up there so long, you could no longer erase the board. We were going to have to either chip it off or throw it out. And I just had it. And I said to the kids, the first kid who writes a program that allows me to type any fraction into the system and draws me a graphical representation of it as parts of a circle, I'll take you out to lunch. 2 little girls handed me this program the next day that in fact does that. And what bugs me is all the curriculum expected of those kids was to know which vocabulary word was the top word and which was the bottom word. This isn't mathematics. This is Swahili. If I flipped a coin, I would be accurate more often. So working on a project like this isn't time-consuming or inefficient. It's more efficient. If you can spend 2 days understanding something that you used to spend 2 years not understanding, this is a better way of going. And they are dealing with angle measure and diameter and circumference and variable, etc. You know, I'm concerned with the question of, is deep learning possible? When do kids get to do something longer than the course of an antibiotic? When do they become good at something? One of my favorite educational authors, Angela Petrie, 100 years ago said, I don't remember the school ever staying with a beautiful idea long enough to have it become an important part of children's lives. So the best piece of advice I can share with you that I have shared with hundreds of audiences I've had the privilege of speaking with is less us, more them. Anytime you think you should intervene on behalf of some educational transaction, as a parent, as an educator, just as a citizen, you should ask yourself, is there less that I can do and more that they can do? How can I shift maximum agency to the learner? Because only then will they gain the greatest benefit of the experience. You know, again, I come back to my beloved grandson, Theo, and I think about the stuff that we do in schools that we know is bad for kids, that we know is against their self-interest. And we understand that we live in this crazy, upside-down, often violent, nonsensical world. And as educators, if we won't stand between kids and the madness, who will? For those of us who know better, we need to do better. There's never been a more exciting time to be an educator and in a world that's increasingly perilous. And it's critical that we do right by the kids that we have the privilege of serving. I thank you for the work that you do on behalf of society and children, and I look forward to having a conversation with you throughout the conference. Thanks so much for having me.